13th. Roll call. Commissioner Martinez?
Here.
Commissioner Edward?
Here.
Commissioner Baldwin? Here. Commissioner Talia Pietro? Here. Commissioner Haywood? Yeah. Commissioner Barrow here. Commissioner Homan has an excused absent. Let the record reflect that a quorum is present for the meeting. Today, we're undertaking a different strategy. There will be no votes today. The Planning and Zoning Department will present a draft municipal use zone district for review and discussion. The meeting is not a hearing and no action on this subject will be taken. The chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission may or may not allow public comment. Director Hill.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, good evening, and thank you for your willingness to convene a new kind of meeting called a working session. What we're going to do tonight is literally study some things. This draft of a municipal use zone is something we've been talking about for a while, and if you have looked at it and you've said to yourself, well, this is something rather bare bone and basic, and where are all the details? Well, we're going to talk about those details this evening. Now, in a study session, there is no predetermined outcome because there is going to be a need for time to work on this. We may need another meeting. We may need 2 more meetings before we can even think of the questions that need to be asked for this. So as we're studying, we'll have questions, and then we'll have another round of questions, and then we'll have another round of questions. And then we'll get to a point where we feel like we have some refinement, and then maybe we can release it to the public. But for now, this is the very beginning. What we as staff would like to see as we move forward is hopefully we'll have these working sessions regularly, and for every session, we hope to have at least 2 subjects. If we have 1 subject per meeting with everything we're being asked to do, you can imagine how long that is going to take. Now, as far as long it will take, I want to clarify that as this is not a hearing and we don't have a predetermined outcome, there is nothing programmed into this meeting to finish. This is a work in progress. So I would prefer that this meeting not be lengthy. We can take maybe up to an hour if necessary to talk about this zone, and if it's a half an hour, that's fine. And then Brennan will give a brief on Robert's Rules of Order, and the same thing. So these are not intended to be long meetings. They're not intended to be late meetings. These are going to be a sprinkling of meetings over time. So I wanted to clarify that much. Now, we have items related to the municipal zone and to Robert's Rules of Order. Those items are specifically our study items. And during those items, we do not have public comment because it's study for us. When we're done with these items, if the chair sees a need to allow public comment, the chair may do so, but that is at the chair's discretion. So I wanted to clarify those things. So are there any questions on anything that I've said so far before we begin? Commissioner Baldwin. Madam Chair, Commissioner Baldwin, talk about Robert's Rules of Order there.
Well, and that's actually to my point, which is work sessions being a more informal kind of process. Is the intent to have strict Robert's rules in play for that discussion period or not?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Baldwin, for this session, I would recommend that the way that staff will address the chair to speak to a commission member should stay in place. If the commissioner has a comment, please ask the chair to make a comment. So those things, just for the sake of how we communicate amongst ourselves, I would recommend stay in place. Yeah. Okay, all right. Madam Chair, Commissioners, let's take a look at this municipal use zone. And apart from what's on the page, I want to talk a little bit about why this is happening. As you know, the village has the resource to acquire property. And the biggest priority for that acquisition is open space. It is something very, very precious to people in this village, that as the village grows, that we acquire land for open space to maintain character values that are expressed in our master plan. Now, we may acquire some property like we did with the Anderson property not too long ago that has both a house and 80 acres that is going to be dedicated to open space. Sometimes there will be a building, and sometimes there won't be a building. If there is a building, we can use it. If we need to build something new, we will have a piece of land to build that facility on. There are so many scenarios that happen when the government buys land. And this land that is bought this year or next year and whatever it's going to be used for will be village property 10, 50 years down the road and will be there if a public facility is needed. So what we are doing is attempting to categorize all of the things that we own today, but plan for the future as far as having land for facilities and infrastructure as we go. But we have to have a zone category that captures as much of this as we can practically do. And we've got some squiggles, and obviously open space is one of them. So that is the purpose of it. That's what we're trying to get to with this zone. Point being that with the acquisition of the Anderson property, there's a very nice, beautiful mansion there. Well, it's a house. And we sure would like to use it for something other than a house, but we can't under the current zoning. That's why we're working on this. So as a point of departure, that's what we're trying to do. The permissive uses is a list of things that are our take on what uses we might encounter. Now, the obvious omission, as a staff comment, is open space. As I just said, that's one of the most important things we do, and that will be added to the list because it will be the primary thing that we purchase land for. Public schools, the public schools are a separate jurisdiction. Are we going to do planning with them? There may be a reason to do that. So this does not give the village school jurisdiction, but it might present a premise to work with them to have some conversation from the village as to what we want from those facilities, especially their design. So we'll see about that. We are anticipating that we may buy properties that are irregular in shape. They may be small in size. We may have opportunities to assemble them over time. We may buy properties that we won't use at all for a period of time. That's why this is so general, because in some instances we may acquire something, we're not quite sure what we're going to do with it. So time may pass under this zoning before a facility is needed. So I just wanted to give you the kind of the government tick on what we're thinking. But as a planning commission, what you're going to see is if a version of this is adopted on your recommendation and the village buys a piece of property, we have to apply for this zone like anybody else. And the village is going to have to follow village rules. So we're not creating this to create an island. We're going to be in the same stream as everybody else. And that's what this is for. So that's a start. I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you just want to dig in and tell me what you see and what you think about this. And as I said, there's no predetermined outcome this meeting. This is just study and questions. So, Madam Chair, however you want to take the floor from here.
Thank you, Director Hill. We are discussing among ourselves on the commission, so if anybody would like to comment, I'll be happy to approve that. Commissioner Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I really appreciate the initial take on this and the iterative process here, because I was thinking about the conversation with Commissioner Haywood at a prior session about, we don't really have anything that says if this is something held by the village, what happens to it? Or does it happen if there's a park, for example, or a stretch of land connected to the park? What happens down the road? Do we really know? And I think it's an excellent thing. So one, I just want to say kudos for bringing this up, and kudos for this new process. I'm very excited about it. Now, into the meat of the matter. And I do appreciate the addition of open space and in the list of uses. To that point in B, it's listed as permissive uses, which begs the question of, is there a conditional use? There's certain things that are permissive, certain things that are conditional. That's in our lexicon right now. What we're really talking about is something new. And so it may be better to have just uses. The following uses shall be allowed. So that says it's permissive in the MU zone only upon approval of a site development plan by the Planning and Zoning Commission and the trustees. So it's not about the typical permissive conditional. It's just, these are the uses, this is it, that's all she wrote. And so that might be clearer to just simply say the following uses are allowed upon the approval of a site development plan approved by us, and then to the Board of Trustees, which is our normal process. The second component that caught my attention was the parking piece. The parking for government and public uses shall be provided as established in the applicable subsections of 9.2.18 of the Village Code. The challenge is that some uses are called out in that code, but others are not. So do we want one way to address it, for example, like public libraries, public schools, community centers, recreation are all called out in the parking statute, but a lot of these other uses aren't. And so there is, however, an alternative parking plan which is allowed in the code, and it basically says, it's just Section C, an alternative parking plan may be submitted for approval demonstrating how parking will be accommodated through a combination of on-site, off-site, whether public or private, shared and or on-street parking. So it sort of says, come on in with your best plan for how this works with this property. And that may be a simpler point than the way it's written here, because if the way it's written here, it sort of says, well, some are called out, but some aren't. So what do we do if we get something? We don't have good direction. And that same challenge is sort of in place on the landscaping. We say landscaping shall be provided as established in 9.2.19, except where impractical, including but not limited to utility, recreational, or agricultural-related properties. So who determines what's impractical? Is it us? Is it the planning director? Is it, it's not clear. So, and that 9.2.19 only applies to VC and C1 zones where 20% of the lot is covered, or expansions of commercial property by at least 20%. So we probably should just say that explicitly that the municipal use zone is covered by these things, because otherwise, again, we have a point that doesn't land anyplace. I mean, very few things would meet that criteria of the 20% coverage or the 20% added. So the Other smaller things that caught my eye, it talks about in design that metal panels are not allowed. I would want to make sure that metal roofs are clearly allowed, because that's a very common type of material for a roof in the village. And we wouldn't want to say that you couldn't design for that. Let's see, and, Madam Chair, if I may ask the director a question. In the height regulations, there are two different heights, the 26 feet, which is sort of like, think of as house height, and then 36 shall be permitted where essential for new agriculture-related buildings and structures. So what is magic about 36 feet?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Baldwin, this is good study discussion, because we choose numbers in the hope to reflect a concern about something. You know, where I used to work for Sandoval County, the maximum height in the base rural agricultural zone was 36 feet. And people would ask, if you are out in the middle of nowhere, why in the world would you want to build something 36 feet? That used to be the typical height of a barn. So
Okay.
it's not, you don't see a lot of 3-story houses out in rural areas, but you do see barns. And the other part of it is that we're not really sure how tall this will need to go. But what we do understand is that there will be facilities that are occupied by people, and there will be facilities that are utility that are not. And usually the utility facilities can be pretty tall. They could even be taller than 36 feet, especially if we're talking about a new telecommunications tower that could be much taller than that. So where this goes and whether or not we're going to have two heights in here, I don't know. But we were attempting to have some differentiation, but as a process, this may not be workable. It's an idea. We may have to go with one, or we may have to utilize the code's description of the site development plan to establish heights in that site development plan. So this was a thought, but whether it's workable or not, it's a fair point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Do we have other comments from Commissioner Martinez?
Madam Chair, the first thing I'll do is kind of address what she's talking about. And I think that height was more for equipment, more than towers. But I think that you're correct in what we really need to do is start addressing, and it might be that it needs to come in with a plan. Because if you have a piece of equipment that is, and we can't use numbers until they bring it in, it makes sense, and it makes sense to us, and it makes sense for the building. But if it doesn't, then I think that height that we're talking about was in the old days when you used to have those big, tall equipment that they had to bring them in, no different than the RVs now when you have to get your new roof on it. But I agree with what she's talking about. I think that what we have here, we almost have a two-phase here, because you're bringing all the points that are really getting into the commercialism and the parking, et cetera. But then when you look at what we're looking on open spaces and what we're really purchasing, I think there we have to really put a lot of effort into really opening our minds to subject matter on the property. And this property is a perfect example. That is a house, that is an asset to the village, that is, so in an asset to the village like that, how can we transform it into because I think we're gonna have to start really doing is we're gonna have to put a different set of hats on now. And I think that it might be really important to see if there's any other small communities or any cities that are going through the same structure, because there is a lot of potential income that can be made. With that income comes having to have the staffing that transforms the simple agri-nature center into all of a sudden, what are we gonna do? What are the potentials? Who's gonna take care of it? How are we gonna go through that? So I think that this is a perfect timing to open the conversation of, is there something out there that already is that we can look at? Because if we're gonna have to take it from brand new from the beginning, I've talked to a lot of people and said, well, why don't you make it a bed and breakfast? Why don't you make it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. With that being said, there is a process of staffing, there is a process of insurance, there's a process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we get from something that's sitting there that we have to transform, but at the same time, it is an asset. It is a very high value asset that brings income into the village. But where do we get that balance? How do we really, so that's why I was kind of reaching out. Is there any other villages that have gone through the growing factors that we have? Because we are gonna run into these subject properties that do have, when it's just vacant land, piece of cake. But if it does have building on it, how do we use that building in transformation for what reasons? And I think that's gonna be a really subject that we really need to address and get really detailed into that specific one. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Martinez, thank you. And I can offer a couple of considerations from, you know, all the places I worked and things that have happened in urban scenarios where you're talking about an interaction of something that exists and something that new that comes in and how those things are juxtaposed. Mm-hmm. Some cities have taken to emphasizing building design, and I'll give you an example that you could be on a main street flanked with buildings, and they may be historical or a modern take on historical, and you may have one building that has retail on the floor and living suites on the upper stories, and then you may have a building that looks very similar to it where there is light industrial going on there and you wouldn't even know it because the light industrial doesn't produce noise or fumes or anything like that, but on the landscape you can't tell really one from the other. So with the Anderson property, which is beautiful, the use of it isn't going to change the look of it, nor can we afford to do that. So whatever we do with it, there is a responsibility on us to preserve what we buy and utilize it very, very carefully. But your point is just absolutely spot on insight, because that is going to be a challenge for us. So whatever we buy, we have to figure out both how to use it and how to value it.
And to follow up a little bit, I don't think that there is a negative to it, because one of the few things when I first moved over here, the village bought the houses that right here on Osuna, which is right across from the building.
Yeah.
And what they did is they specifically committed to buy residential, tear it down for a park. So that was very unique. When I saw that, I said, wow, that's one heck of an investment for a park. And that's a tear down, you know? But at the same time, if that's what it was meant for, and I can understand open space, but the other part that I think is critical is that we do have a unique community here. And I think this is going to be a perfect time to start infrastructuring what the people and the village are wanting to do, as you defined, 15 years from now, 25 years from now. And I think the decisions that we're going to go through in these little structures right here are really going to make a big difference. But backing up a little bit, I think that the Anderson House is a very unique, and I don't even want to use a dinosaur theory, because it has all kinds of potential, but it takes it away from open space and the normality of the village. Because that is, in so many ways, a perfect tourism income-making business, but how do you get it from where it is incorporated into open space, where it's incorporated into the village, where it's incorporated into having to create a business orientation specifically for that, but at the same time, we might be looking at other properties where it might be falling under the same category. So it's a good discussion. I think it's gonna open up a lot of wonderful conversations and possibilities.
Thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Do we have more?
Madam Chair, Director
Commissioner-
Hill.
Commissioner Talia Pietra, please.
I have concerns about the utility buildings. I mean, are these going to be put anywhere? I don't think we want 36-foot-high buildings popping up. And I know this is theoretical. I just don't think we want to open ourselves up for these things to pop up anywhere. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, yes, obviously, you know, the premise of creating a zone and incorporating that into the code makes it as much subject to the village master plan as any other zone we do. So this will not be an island. And we can draft something, bring it for public review, take it to BOT. The conversation with this is going to be ongoing. You know, I'm hoping that after some group of meetings, we're able to refine something enough that the P&Z Commission can hold a public hearing, get public comment, and send it on, and then it's adopted, and then we start using it. When we start using it, and we start seeing what it builds, are we going to need to refine it? Probably. Yeah.
Thank you. I do think there's some great thoughts in this. I really do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have more comments?
Chair, can I check
Commissioner
in
Edwards?
with what Commissioner Talia Pietra had just said?
Excuse me.
Could I check in with Commissioner Talia Pietra on what she was just talking about? Sure. I think it's a great comment. I mean, it's really important. And as you think about the different zones that we have on residential or commercial, there's like, you know, a 1, 2, or a 3, different rules in different ways. So if there's, I mean, one of the ways that we could maybe approach this as a village is, you know, there's a MU1, and that's things like Village Hall or others, and there's like, you know, an MU2 that might be open spaces that are very clear, like there's nothing going to be built on that, hopefully, unless it came with it. But maybe there's an MU3 that says, yeah, this is where, this is a place where we could do utility buildings and structures and have it have taller height. So that's one way of going about it. But your point is really well taken. Thank you.
Thank you both. Commissioner Edward?
This wasn't described in here, and I guess the one thing I think that would color this a little bit better is the intent and the process by which property is acquired and why is it acquired. I realize that in the acquisition of the Anderson property, it was probably done in such a way such that the village wouldn't get gouged for the property because of the utility that would be perceived. Maybe there's other reasons. It's maybe the demands of the property owners that they want privacy. And I think that's something we should be really respectful of. But I guess I'd like to know, what is the process by which that leads us to this point of the acquisition of the open space? What is the triggering moment? How do we identify that? And how do we prioritize it? I mean, I think that that's a good step that needs to be taken in this, that I'd like to have a better understanding for. As it relates to, you know, what is written in there, the aspect of, you know, what is its allowable uses and the different types of municipal zoning, I think that has to be like kind of within maybe sorts of a master plan to be thoughtful about it, or do we just kind of, are we manic in our receipt or demand of what we want as a municipal property? I think I would want to look at this from the standpoint, what do we have in place now versus what we anticipate to acquire in the future. This is kind of like a 2 steps. There's the 1 step that we're going to address on the things that we currently have in place that we know we can touch, we can see, we can feel. And then there would be those other elemental that are aspirational and visionary. in terms of what we might acquire, because I think that those would maybe be dealt with in two different ways. And I think it kind of stems from somebody up here, I think it might have been you or one of the guests in the audience. This concern that with the Paladone project, everybody's aware that there's a huge parking deficiency, and was there going to be a camel's nose under the tent of converting a allowable use within the current zoning of the parks that are across the street from it and turning those into parking lots to address a problem. And that was the idea maybe behind creating this municipal zoning, such that if it's going to be a park, it's going to be a park. The story I'd like to share is that in downtown Albuquerque, where the federal courthouse is, I think it's the Domenici Courthouse, there was a beautiful park there. Just beautiful. Trees, grass. And they chose to rip that up instead of tearing up some of those really old, dilapidated, architecturally uninspiring buildings, which they could have easily done. And we have lost a heart and a soul. Any good city and community has open space and parks, and to the degree that we think that they are open inventory to be torn up at any given moment, I think is extremely short-sighted. So I think for myself, I think the idea behind some of these zonings is let's put in place the zoning on the things that we know we have today, and have that some degree of establishment before too much time slips away. And it's just an idea. I don't think it's necessarily the best thing or the right thing to do, but I think it's protect what needs to get protected, and then have a path by which we follow. I think all the comments everybody's made is good. I mean, in the agricultural world, when we did, I think the item 299, is it 299 or 229?
299.
I'm the only person on here in the ag committee, and I try to voice the concerns of what the ag elements of that rule was trying to create. And I think that this institution was deaf to my commentary and the expertise that I bring to the table about having water access. And it wasn't until subsequent meetings that people within the audience, who are also on that committee and who are also involved with agriculture, from what I told, brought it up as an important point. And so I think that there are certain things in here that if we want these things for open space and agriculture and stuff like that, you can't make a cake with only flour. You know, it takes many ingredients, and I think that those are important. You know, 36 feet, you know, there's something called a windmill. I mean, that's an iconic image that for most people in the western part of the United States is a beautiful thing to look at. It's not unappealing. It's probably at least 36 feet. We have an economic development problem in this city, and especially in the village of Los Ranchos, and that is no cell phone service, for which we have a lot of people who live and work at home. Something that you could use for a windmill could serve as a cellular. I can't even drive down my own street and maintain a telephone call. I mean, this is how I think we need to think about these things in an integrated way. And I think protect what needs to be protecting right away in a thoughtful, clear way, and then set forth a path of a strategy. And not everything's going to turn into 3-story apartments that are too close to the street. And I think that, you know, we learned our lesson. And I probably have about 20 other 30 different ideas that will come up later on, but at least for right now, those are just the thoughts that come off the top of my head. Okay. And just because it's zoned municipal doesn't mean that it's zoned municipal for whatever, you know. It needs to have a specific use and a purpose for which people can plan their lives around and their investments.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I just may respond to Commissioner Edwards'
I
comments.
like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Not so much the specifics of it, but for our next meeting, I will bring images of our current facilities and land holdings. Because now we're getting into context, and it's hard to get there without, when you see what the village owns and discussion on what it might become, I think that's a critical component to this process, because whatever is produced in this process will be applied to what we have, not just what we're going to acquire. So I appreciate your comment, Commissioner Edwards. So our next meeting, I will have both images available so that we can look at them and information on the scale of the buildings we currently have.
Thank you.
So one other point I just want to make a point of too is that the village is very irregularly shaped. And living here as long as I have, I think that creates some problems and opportunities. But one of the things I've noticed too is that there's almost a two-class system in the village. If you live on a particular street, you get a certain type of treatment. If you live on Rio Grande Boulevard, you get that thing swept every week. You live on any other street in the village, it doesn't happen at all. When it comes to open space and land and government institutional zoning, I think we have a responsibility to the people on the fringe of our community, not just the ones that sit in the middle of it.
Thank you. Commissioner Haywood?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make a general observation in terms of the specifics, that the permissive use does say that permissive uses will only be allowed upon the approval of a site development plan. So that's kind of a catch-all in terms of concerns about height. Any other specifics? It's not like the village can just go along, merrily do its own thing. It'll have to go through a public hearing process with a site plan. And also, I don't think these kinds of zones can get too specific, because unlike, let's say, an R1 zone, you don't have a specific type of building that's going in. You have buildings, you have no buildings, you have cell towers, you have barns. So you can't get too bogged down in the minutiae of detail. You're going to have to accept that it's just a very broad-based zone, and that things will get caught with site development plans, rather than getting too restrictive in the zone itself.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Could I have the
Haywood.
floor?
Do you have a, excuse me?
I was just going to add to that.
Yeah,
So could you do a
Excuse
flange?
me. I wanted to
Oh, I thought we were
address her.
informal.
No, we are, to a certain extent. Director Hill, do you have a comment to?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Haywood, I agree completely. And there are passages within our current code that actually make statements to that effect, that some development issues can be expressed in the site development plan for public review and consideration. So we will meet that same scenario in some version of this. And where the flexibility is and where the code is going to apply is probably going to depend very much on what the subject building is going to be. There are some things we can be flexible on, for example, landscaping, if there's landscaping already in place. If we buy something that has natural vegetation, the last thing we want to do is tear it up. We want to keep it. So how do we handle new landscaping in a situation like that? It would simply be expressed in the site development plan, which we can do. So I just wanted to thank you for your point, and that is something that we can work into the process. Yeah.
Commissioner Edward, do you want to comment on that?
No, I liked what he had to say.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Martinez?
A couple of things. I think what we're missing here is two things, and we just saw it right now. I think that the reason we're here is to get us an opportunity to talk amongst ourselves on a situation that we have to review, talk about, and be able to improve. We'll never be able to reinvent the wheel. But the concept that what he's doing right now is giving us a workshop to educate us. And I think that's one of the things that I started way at the beginning when we got all together. I think understanding education is a key to what we need to make choices from our perspective. But what we're doing tonight is going on an agenda that he's kind of helping us say, okay, well, here's this, let's talk. We're not talking about making any rights or wrongs. We're communicating about how can we transform what exists, where the problems are, to a better place. And that's with communication with what we're doing tonight. And I think that's where we really need to get into how do we feel, what are the specific areas, so that he can work with us and say, well, I hear your side, but let me give you the planning and zoning side, and get to a point to where everything that we're doing here tonight is just a stepping stone and a phase to try to improve something that exists. That's number one. Number two is I think that we, including myself, are needing to really understand the process. And I think that the Robert Rules of Order, which is coming up next, is really an important part, because I find myself wanting to jump in, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that what we're really needing to do is, as a commission, as planning and zoning, there's a two-phase to it. Really understanding Robert's Rules of Order so that we can follow them to a beautiful procedure, which happens all the time. But more important, take what we're trying to do tonight and grow and learn. And if there's changes, let's work on them so that we can improve. One of the things that I feel is important, we're getting a lot of stuff from the public. Well, if we can try to fix them in the process of planning and zoning, maybe we'll get less. Maybe we'll be able to help find those fine tunings where it will help the community out, because I think we're on that same facet of we want to help our neighbors. We want to help the whole concept. How we do it is us being able to talk like we're going to do tonight and look at what specifically they're bringing to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Do we have more?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Talia Pieta?
Director Hill, I have a quick question. Commissioner Hayward had said something about that it would come back to us to make all these decisions. I just have a question, because like with the fire trucks and all of this, street sweepers and everything that was at 411, it was a conditional use. They could use it as that. So there was not really much of anything that we could do to stop it. So is this going to be a conditional use with this MU-whatever property, or is it going to be a permissive use that we can have some control over? They're dead.
Well, we still run on batteries, and that's okay. And this goes to something earlier that Commissioner Baldwin had mentioned, Madam Chair, Commissioner. How are we going to refer to these uses? So I think not having a definitive information at this point, we may get a little more clarity when we have images of our facilities to look at. I would suggest that having a list of uses for this zone simplifies things from the standpoint that if this zone is applied for and approved and put into place, all of the uses listed would be available, and there would be no reason for the village to come back for an additional conditional use permit. I think that is, as far as wanting to follow a standard set of rules, it might be beneficial for the government as a unique entity to have that flexibility. Now, how it's going to turn out, I can't say, but I would suggest that possibility. Yeah.
And again, Director Hill, you had said that you would bring photos of the village property. Could we have a drive-by and see them instead? It may be better to see them in person.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, I'll ask. We would have to figure out a way to do it so many commissioners at a time. to avoid having a quorum. Maybe what we could do is I could bring some images for the next meeting and ask the commission if there are certain ones of those that you would like to tour. So I would say, let's look at all of them and then figure out which ones we want to see in person, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Commissioner Edward.
Is there a, without castigating people within your profession, are there communities that you could come to mind that you think they've done it wrong and it's taken years to figure it out and we don't want to follow the same path? And is there ones where you say, wow, they really had a great model on how they followed it?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Edward, I can't think of a particular community as a model. What I can offer is what most jurisdictions do when there's an opportunity to acquire a piece of property and it's evaluated from an environmental standpoint. Is it useful for an open space? Can trails be put there? Can some educational things be put on it? And sometimes the answer to that question is no. You know, that it's some odd piece and there it is. It's got no connectivity to any of those things. What some governments choose to do is to combine facilities on that site. So as opposed to buying one piece of land for one facility, you buy a larger piece of property and put 3 or 4. So the model of combining facilities has great advantages for infrastructure, and having all the government services in one place makes government operations more efficient. So without locations, I can tell you that that tendency in government acquisitions is there.
What do you think the possibility that we're really going to have a lot of government properties that will be functional to the effect that they're going to be a large building to house some kind of services? If you take a look at the overall Albuquerque area and the services that we receive from the greater 3 or 4 county area, the village is not the municipal answer for everybody else's issues. And I mean, I don't necessarily see the village clamoring at the state legislature to get a tax and revenue department office that hires 250 people and build a building for them. But more along the lines of, it seems that the municipal uses that we're kind of probably looking at here, the vast majority will be related to some sort of park, open space, agriculture, wildlife. Is that a fair statement?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Edward, yes, I think that is a fair assumption. I think what we're not able to see right now, and I'll give you an example with open space. Even open space needs a building or two to house equipment to maintain it. How it's maintained may change over time. And so some of this, there simply isn't an answer for right now. But I think in terms of what the village's tendency has been over a period of time with their acquisitions, the open space has been the priority and will likely continue to be the case. Yeah.
I just have one last comment. Okay. So it wasn't until, I guess, the last 12 months has the village spent any money on anything relating to kids. And we claim to be a place where we want to have affordable housing and we want to have community and stuff like this. Until they did the pickleball court and the basketball court over here, you know, there really hasn't been much spent in the way of resources for children at all. And I look at some of these things in parks and playgrounds. I mean, there just isn't much out there. If you want to take your kids swimming, you have to go over to Sierra Vista West you have to go a long way away. I mean, there's not a public pool in our community. We always call ourselves a community, but we don't offer much in the way of things as a community offers. We outsource everything. We want our citizens to send their kids to private schools outside our borders as an educational answer. We want them to go swim in pools outside of our community. We want them to have parks or little leagues and things like that to play outside of our community. And so it's just, I think I'm the only person up here with young kids. And until you have that, you don't know it. And I think that there's too many people in government that are too old and they forget what it's like to be a parent and raise kids.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Edward, thank you. All right, commissioners, let's see. I'm going to ask for some concluding remarks so that we can move on to the Roberts Rules training, Madam Chair. But any closing remarks, and we will pick this up again, so not an end, but would ask for your concluding remarks.
Commissioner Baldwin?
Thank you. And I will do my closing remarks before I do. Just a quick consistency issue in B under the uses. It probably should say public parking lots as opposed to parking lots in general, just so we're consistent. Thank you. Again, thank you. And all those who have been a part of creating this conversation. I think it is incredibly important that as a village and as a commission, we do more in the sort of larger thinking and not simply respond to individual cases. To Commissioner Martinez's point, the more we create updated, clear, meaningful, consistent processes related to land use, the fewer one-offs we're going to be getting in. And that's, in the long term, good for everybody. Everybody's going to be a lot happier. So I think this is a great starting spot. I do think that the draft has a lot of good frame to it. I think it makes sense. I think we've covered some things that may need to get adjusted and tweaked over the course of time. And the only thing I would urge is if we're going to be setting up a schedule of intensity around this, that we get it on our calendars as soon as possible, because I know everybody is a full book, and having something go, oh, we're going to continue it next week, can sometimes be really challenging. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner Baldwin. Yes, after Brennan has concluded his Roberts Rules comments, we can circle back and talk about scheduling the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Martinez, tiny.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things that's critical is that what came out this evening is brainstorming. What came out this evening is children, which came out this evening. And I think that that's critical for our position here, because without bringing it to the table, I think we lose somebody else's point of view. And we all have points of view, and I appreciate the children, because they are. That's a very important part. But my point was wanting to ask over here is that I think that what we have that was brought up by you also, Chairman or Commissioner Edwards, is that is there a process to really understand the growth of the village of Los Ranchos and the entity for its need in building spaces, in equipment, et cetera, because I think that's something that we're losing out over here. We're buying, we're acquiring, but the thing that we have to do is start realizing, okay, at what point in time, as they did with the village hall that was remodeled to this, at what point are we going to get too big, and is it time to really take some point of time to say, okay, well, let's talk about the Agri-Nature Center in equipment and what size, so that we can actually incorporate that into here. Because I think what we're missing out on is this is a long-term growth. And are the buildings, the village buildings themselves needing to expand? And what types, so that we can actually have that as some kind of understanding, so that we have an overview broadness. Those are my points.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Martinez. We will move on. This is just phase one of brainstorming long-term discussion. And thank you, Director Hill, for starting the discussion. I presume that you've taken extensive notes. Okay. We now have item number 3, review and discussion of Robert's Rules of Order. The chair of the Planning Commission may or may not allow public comment. Mr. Williams.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you. I appreciate your attention and your attendance tonight. Next on the agenda is just a brief overview, a brief summary of Robert's Rules of Order, commonly referred to as Robert's Rules. Just as a little background, this is a manual of parliamentary procedure that was authored by Henry Martin Robert, hence the name Robert's Rules. The overall purpose is to provide boards, commissions with the ability to operate a smooth, orderly, and fairly conducted meeting. It's used by all sorts of bodies. I know the Little League Association that I was involved in a couple years ago used Robert's Rules when they were conducting business about Little League Baseball. And it also pertains, of course, to the Planning and Zoning Commission for the Village of Los Ranchos. In totality, Robert's Rules is about 900 pages. It's extensive, it's complicated, and it's daunting. We're only asking by the next meeting that you all have this memorized. Okay, I'm joking. We are not going to expect, do not expect, I'm not even aware of a board or commission in the planning zoning realm that would consider themselves to be experts in Robert's Rules. There are rules, there are standards, but using those effectively is the key. The general guidelines, particularly for groups of 12 or fewer, does not require strict adherence to the rules, but understanding or knowing the spirit of the rules and why they're there is the key. In your packet, I think it's the next 5 pages, these are handouts. They were certainly not authored by me. I begged and borrowed. I'm not going to say I stole, but this is not my work. This has been created through many organizations, but this is a paring down of what we believe are the most important aspects as it relates to conducting a public meeting under Robert's Rules. The rules exist to help the decision-making body make good decisions, and again, ensure that the meetings are run effectively and fairly. That includes all participants. That may be an applicant or an agent that testifies before you. That would include staff as well. That may be members of the community that are in support or in opposition to a particular request. And it also applies to you as commissioners. We want to make sure that everybody is treated fairly in the process. I can't overlook, I mentioned staff, and maybe I'm a little bit biased, but Michelle Austin, who is our administrative assistant, one of her many responsibilities is to take minutes of every Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, as well as work sessions. And so by following these rules and incorporating the appropriate level of formality, it greatly helps her when she's able to transcribe those minutes. It's not a verbatim, it's not a transcript, but it's a general summation. So it's very easy for her to have the chair recognize Commissioner Martinez, then Commissioner Martinez says, I agree with Commissioner Edward. It really makes things run very smoothly. There are legal standards as it relates, again, to meetings, the Open Meetings Act, that we have to meet. And then from a historical standpoint, there are times where the attorney or a staff member has to go back and look at something that was talked about, that was described in the minutes from 4 or 5 years ago. And if we've got clear minutes, meaning we have clear discussion that takes place, it just makes it so much easier for us to be able to go back and look at what was said or how it was said. So a couple key points here, and then I'll wrap up. The chair, first and foremost, the chair is in charge. Commission members are not supposed to speak until they're recognized by the chair. Recognition can occur in any number of ways, but until the chair designates a commissioner to speak, they should refrain from doing so. Secondly, all commission members have the same rights to speak and be heard, or to express themselves, to ask questions, and to cast an educated vote. If there's a question about what are we voting on, and sometimes it can get complicated, right? There's a motion and there's an amendment to the amendment, and what's up and what's down. it is absolutely appropriate and encouraged under Robert's rules to ask, where are we? What are we talking about? I want to make sure that I'm completely understanding as a commission member, what I'm about to vote on. Third, only one question or one issue is to be considered at a time. How do you eat an elephant? If it's a large, complicated matter, we start very small and we start issue by issue by issue by issue. I know as staff members, we love those complicated hearings. We will get some issues, some matters, some topics of discussion that are very, very complicated. Our job is to assist you as a commission in making sure that every step is taken. We're not just going to push you into the deep end of the pool, but we are here to make sure that it's done in an orderly manner. Again, it's okay to ask a question at any time and have the question restated before a vote is taken. And then lastly, no member should speak a second time on the same issue or the same question if there is another commission member that is wishing to speak first. In other words, we want to be fair, we want to take turns, so Commissioner Williams here doesn't monopolize the conversation on a particular issue. If I say my piece, I should let everybody else have an opportunity. They don't have to, but give everybody else an opportunity to ask their questions or provide their 2 cents before I take over, before I get the floor again. We do have copies, the village has copies of Robert's Rules, not the full version, it's kind of the condensed Reader's Digest version. If any of the commission is interested in checking one of those out, you can see Director Hill or Ms. Austin and we can get you a copy of that. I won't promise that it will cure your insomnia, but it should only take a couple days light reading for you to get through that, at least the abbreviated version. And again, we're not the Robert's Rules police as staff members. We're here to help. Mr. Chappell, I don't want to speak for him, but I think he will acknowledge that he's here to help as well. If there's questions about parliamentary procedure, what comes next? Do we take a vote here? Do we do something else different there? So again, we're here to help and want to make sure that, again, meetings are run as efficiently, professionally, and fairly as possible. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll stand for questions if there are questions, but there are some kind of user guides or cheat sheets that are in your packet. The first one is more kind of a general description of what I just described. But again, let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Commissioners, do we have any questions, comments? No? Commissioner Edward, are you?
I was just going to say I've watched some of these things on YouTube where they, how you go about doing it. And I would just say, if you feel verklempt about it, which I do, I watch those. And I learn that way better than I do necessarily reading. But I'm going to print these cheat sheets out and have them with me.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Edward, that's exactly why we put them in there. Personally, I think the big three are making a motion, knowing how to make a motion, knowing how to make an amendment to a motion, and then knowing how to make an amendment to an amended motion are, in my opinion, the most important. I, by no stretch of the imagination, am going to sit here and act like I am an expert on Robert's Rules, but I do believe, and I've seen over my career, boards and commissions that are very good at just knowing the basics, and that is really all we're looking for. It's really pretty easy to do if we just commit to worrying about those three types of issues.
No? Any other comments?
Madam Chair, our attorney would like to make a comment.
Attorney
Madam
Chappell?
Chair, I would say that from my perspective, and because I have to try to monitor that and give some direction, one of the things that everyone does that we probably shouldn't do is under Robert's Rules of Order, the discussion by the commission does not take place until there's a motion on the floor that is to be discussed. So these roundtable discussions before a motion create a lot of chaos. So That's an important part under Robert's Rules of Order. The other one is I have a AI computer-generated program that will have created a summary of Robert's Rules of Order that's detailed, but much easier to read than the actual text. And if you're going to look at it, make sure you got the 12th version. If anyone would like for me to print those summaries, I will print them and bring them to the next meeting.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I just may make one comment. Robert's Rules of Order underpin everything we do. So there is never a bad time to ask a question about this subject, whether it is a work session or a hearing. If there is a question, please ask the question, because that's how we learn. We learn as we go along. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that. So this is not one moment on this day. This initiates something that we need to have an ongoing awareness of. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Can I conclude that we're not going to be tested on that next week?
Madam Chair, I can neither confirm nor deny that.
2 weeks.
But
Any other comments? Okay. Inasmuch as this is a work session rather than a proper meeting, it is number 4, Commissioners' informal discussion, which we have had to some extent. Are there any reports or information that any of the commissioners would like to share at this point? Commissioner Martinez.
This relates to exactly what we're doing right now. One of the things that we had a conversation about is how are we going to make changes to help? And what I'd like to do is bring to the table is that there was something that happened and has been happening is we've been getting these variances and we've been having these issues. Well, I've been corrected and did some research. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring, and I've talked to Planning and Zoning Director Hill about it, and I think that we can have a process that we can make a change in a zoning that will benefit the people and the zoning. And so what I'd like to do is bring it to the table that I will, in the next meeting, try to get with them to show us how to go through that procedure. And I think that we'll realize that it is something that's necessary, something that's going to change the variances of what's been happening, but more important, it is an asset to the village and to the people.
Thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Commissioner Baldwin?
Following up on Commissioner Martinez's comment, it would be incredibly helpful to me, particularly as we're getting into these work sessions, if there was a work plan for the work sessions. What are the topics that we're going to be tackling? Because all of these should end up in some new code or an updated ordinance. That's sort of what we're in the business of doing. And so if we are going to be tackling, I think, to your point, could be a lot of subject matter, it'd be really helpful to know, here's our work plan for the rest of '24. We're going to be tackling these 3 issues. And whether it's setbacks or signs or fill in the blank. I mean, there's plenty of stuff that's come before us over the course of time. It'd be great to have a sense of this is what the rest of '24 work plan is, this is what the '25 work plan is. It helps me just wrap my head around stuff and also then say, gosh, I see something that seems like we're getting a lot of these variances, or it's something that just seems like it's beginning to catch on fire, and maybe we want to move it up, in the line. It's helpful, but if we don't know when it's scheduled or when it's being considered, or even if it's on the list, that's harder. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Baldwin, yes, I agree. We do have a list of things, and to be honest, I wouldn't call that list a work session because it has a tendency to move about. And the point is well made that for the staff, I think we need to, hammer it down in a more succinct fashion and present it as such, and that can be part of these discussions. I know that the administration will want to chime in on this as far as, okay, these are the priorities, and this is what we want to get done this year and next year. So you are very clear and do agree that is something we will work on.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Commissioner Edward?
I know we have a new planning, code enforcement gentleman working, and I don't know if people are doing things in response to what he has done. But the one thing I will say is, at least when it comes to anything construction related, I hate when we have these variance things. I mean, so many of them could be prevented. And I think it deals with code enforcement and making sure that people have their permits and stuff like that. I'd called in earlier, there was a construction project and there's nothing visible about it at all that there was any permit. And I'm just like, man, I can just see that coming up and biting us. And, but there was, and they were gonna send somebody out to do that. So I think we're a more effective body if things are policed. And I know that sounds to a lot of people like the big brother, but at the end of the day, it's one thing to get caught speeding. It's another thing to build something that's illegal and then it sits there for 100 years and everybody else is wondering why they can't do the same.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Edward, thank you. I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Okay, this has been our first work session. There will be no vote. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, do I have a second?
I second.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
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 Meeting is adjourned. Thank you. 7:13, sorry.